Hi! Today I want to talk about something I've never talked about on my channel, which is TV shows. This is a different video for me, but specifically I wanted to talk about shows from the 2000s that made me, that I was watching when I was younger, and also kind of take a journey down the line of some shows that I watched later that made me in a way, but also broke me because they just took such a turn. But to start off with the happiest memories, I want to start off with what I was watching when I was the youngest. And I was a Nickelodeon kid through and through. I didn't watch Hannah Montana, I didn't watch Wizards of Waverly Place. I feel like those were the two hottest shows. Even like Phineas and Ferb, I didn't watch that either. But there was one exception, one show from the Disney Channel that I would watch, and that is Lizzie McGuire. I owned the Lizzie McGuire movie on DVD. It was just the original show for me that was like the classic coming of age tween girl show about like popularity and boys and just like those things that come up like when you're growing up and becoming a teenager. In some ways, I feel like they didn't take it all the way there when they should have. Like there was this one episode where they talked about having eating disorders, and they just did it in like the tiniest sprinkle of a way possible to talk about the problem. Like I think she went like one day or I think she skipped like one meal. Like she just didn't have dinner one night or something like that. And then she passed out. She's like, oh my gosh, you need to eat. And I just kind of chuckled because I was like, this is not what an eating disorder looks like. But even still, for Disney Channel, obviously Disney Channel is not going to be like Degrassi. The only thing I look back on that show that I kind of cringe at and don't think that it holds up is her little brother Matt. I never had a little brother, but even still, like watching those sections of the show, they're just, I don't think that they were ever funny. The humor was very like non-developed kid humor, which is not the case for some of the other shows that I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about SpongeBob in depth, but that's a good example of a show where the jokes hold up for kids as well as adults, and I don't think that the Lizzie McGuire Matt dynamic really holds up as adults. But also, there were just some really weird, funny episodes of Lizzie McGuire. There's this one where they have a costume party, and I remember really liking that episode because it was like a murder mystery party. It was just really interesting and unique, and it went just beyond girl lives her life at school. Sometimes there was pretty unusual things that happened. But overall, I did want to talk about Lizzie McGuire as a show that really made me because I watched it all the time and I felt it had those lessons to learn as a young girl, and it was pretty much the only Disney Channel show that I would ever dare to watch. But the next show I want to talk about that I, again, have revisited today, and it is just an absolute masterpiece, and in my opinion, 1000% holds up. I'm so glad I watched this when I was younger. I feel like nothing was as good as Drake and Josh. That was my show. When I was flipping through channels, it didn't matter what else was on. If Drake and Josh was on, that was my top choice. And I can't believe that it had so few seasons. It seemed like the show was on forever. It felt like I've seen every episode 100 times. The one episode that I've seen the most that sticks out in my mind is they're meaning to go to a wedding, but their car breaks down on the way. That episode I have seen a million times. There are jokes from that show that I still say to this day.
Okay, so how do we buy some? Can't. It says here they're only available in South America. What?
There's tons of content in that show that holds up for adults to go back and rewatch and just relive the glory years Both Drake and Josh's characters were, it wasn't just like hot guy brother who gets girls and nerdy chubby brother. Like there was a real dynamic. They had a brotherly friendship, and don't even get me started on the dynamic between their younger sister. Megan in that show was A+.
Okay, I admit some people call them Jimmies, but everybody I know calls them Sprinkles. Well, I'm not from the South. Fine, I'll look it up on the web right now.
While the Americans would Megan! I was doing my homework.
I'm on the phone.
The side characters of Drake and Josh were so interesting and well developed. Helen, the movie theater boss at Josh's job, she is fantastic. She just has a really fun, developed character. I feel like side characters a lot of the time are very, like, we don't think about them too much and not a lot of effort is put into them. Like, the effort that they put into Megan and into Helen and into even characters that appear for, like, only an episode or two, like some of the girls that Drake dates. And there is some crazy, weird content on this show. There is an episode where Drake accidentally gets married to Josh's pen pal from, I think, Yugoslavia. They just came up with some really hilarious, out-of-the-box storylines, so I give massive credit to that show. And there is a reason why the next show I want to talk about is iCarly. When I got a little bit older, Drake and Josh wasn't on the air for that long, and then I switched to watching iCarly because it had Miranda Cosgrove, and it also had Jerry Trainer, who plays Crazy Steve in Drake and Josh, and then he plays Carly's brother, Spencer, in iCarly. iCarly, I feel, was the last show on Nickelodeon that I really remember enjoying. The only reason iCarly felt so different and unique was because the show is about a girl who has her own online show, and obviously there weren't TV shows about that previously because people didn't have their own online shows, and it was like the first time it was kind of like having a YouTuber who had her own show, which is just an interesting dynamic because it was like you could feel the changing of the times watching this on TV. Like, oh, this is kids' hobbies nowadays. They make online content. So I definitely feel like that show kind of made me, as I was growing up, and started getting really into YouTube shortly after the time of iCarly. I don't know if Carly herself is the most developed character, unfortunately. I feel like maybe that's part of just trying to make a character who is as relatable as possible. She's a little bit bland. Like, I don't even know how I would describe her personality except for maybe like nice and fun, which is, not the most exciting character. The other characters in the show, Freddie is pretty interesting. Sam is obviously hilarious, and Spencer is great as well.
I don't know, 3 or 4.
3 or 4 what? Days, weeks, months?
Yeah, maybe 5.
5 what?
Look, buddy.
The show has a little bit of that syndrome of I'm so random humor, like the Tumblr era of like just doing random things. Like I think they even have a clip called like random dancing, where they just like all of a sudden music starts playing and they start dancing out of nowhere, and it's random dancing. Like, I'm so random, and just randomness being funny. But I don't think it overdoes it. I still think that a lot of the jokes are pretty timeless, and I did go back and watch iCarly. They put iCarly on Netflix not that long ago, so I went back to watch the show to see if I would still enjoy it. And I definitely did, despite the randomness. One of the funny things that sticks out from that show to me is an episode where they want to see what teachers are like when they're not at school, so they go into their teacher's house, and it turns out that she is secretly obsessed with Randy Jackson. And I just remember finding that episode really funny when I first watched it, and still thought it was funny today. And it definitely, that show was extra relatable to me because I felt like I was pretty close to the same age as Carly while watching the show. So our lives like lined up really well. So Miranda Cosgrove, Jerry Trainer, great in both of those two shows. Definitely made me and shaped my TV watching habits when I was younger. However, there are a couple of other shows that I wanted to talk about. I could make a whole video just about this one show that I want to talk about next, and I've thought about it, but I just, instead I'm gonna cover it in this video. Like, around the time I was like tapering off of iCarly, I read the Pretty Little Liars books. And then Pretty Little Liars was announced that it was going to become a TV show. And that show was everything to me. If there is one show out of all of these that I felt the most connected to, it was 1,000,000% PLL. I watched new episodes of that show as they came on TV religiously. I just really loved the show because I think it got me interested in a genre that I really enjoy today, which is a good murder mystery. And it's got that classic high school girl drama type of show, but it also has the premise of who murdered Allison, the four main girls' best friends, and they're trying to figure out the story of her murder, and I really enjoyed that plot. Unfortunately, the show that meant more to me than any other show I've probably ever watched absolutely broke me with the ending. So I read the books, and just in case this was not clear already, this video, I'm deeply going to spoil PLL and every other show I have talked about. In the books, the very first A is revealed to be Mona, which is the same as in the show. And I loved how they did it, thought it was executed great. I loved it in the books, I loved it in the show. Then a new A comes around. And in the books, it's kind of similar to what they do in the show, except the show did it worse. But in the books, it's revealed that the second A is Allie's secret twin sister. And I don't know if I've ever truly enjoyed a secret twin twist. It's just like, it's not, I don't know, it feels like such a trope, like so overdone. But I remember reading that in the books, and the way it was written and the way they executed the fact that it turned out she had a secret twin, I was reading it almost, I couldn't believe that I was enjoying it so much because it was a secret twin. I was so blown away by like, I can't believe I like this as the twist. In the show, I liked the dollhouse that Allie's secret sister had, but I didn't love Cece being the secret, not twin, but secret sister. And I thought it was okay, but after that season, the show really took a dive. It should have ended earlier, but instead they dragged it out and they did a time jump, and now the girls are out of college and in their mid-20s. I was so afraid for who the final A reveal is. This is the thing that the whole show has been building up to, because they solve Allie's murder, so then the only thing left to solve is who's A? Who could A be? Could it be a friend? An ex-boyfriend? No. It was a secret twin. Again. You already did the secret twin twist. You could have done anything else. Anything. And I would have been happier. Then You can't just repeat what you did a few seasons ago, like, oh my god, A's the secret sister. And then for the finale of the show, oh my god, A's a different secret sister. You just repackaged what you did a few seasons ago. Instead of it's Allie's secret sister, now it's Spencer's secret twin, who had an accent that made me want to put a bullet in my head.
Well, you missed breakfast, but Mum's planning a special lunch.
I don't even know what question to ask first.
Who are you? Really? How hard did Mona hit you?
When I watched that episode for the first time, I was screaming at my TV of why Marlene King, the main writer of the show, had done this to me. Why she had made me love this show so much and then made me hate it with all of the fibers of my being. I don't know if I've ever seen a show tank that bad. That's not true. I've seen a show tank worse, but not a show that meant so much to me. Like, I was watching it in high school, like when the girls were in high school, and I felt so connected to it, and the connection of reading the books before you watch a show always adds another layer. I still to this day talk about how that show ruined my life. And it's hard to rewatch it now because I know where it goes. It was the first show that really broke me. Pretty Little Liars is not a top quality show, and I will never argue that it was. But Dexter, that show had a higher production quality, better writing, better storylines, better characters. It was just a more adult show, and I started watching that long after. I wasn't watching it like while it was on TV. I was watching Dexter towards the end of high school, and Dexter was like one of the first like real adult shows that I felt I really got into, and I was watching it with my boyfriend. He had watched the show and wanted to show it to me, and I just fell in love from the very first episode. It kind of built on what I started to learn when I was watching Pretty Little Liars, of how I liked that dark underlying storyline of mystery and murder mystery, and that is obviously taken like 10 levels up in the show Dexter. And it's like very dark, creepy, mysterious. The setting is great, the characters are great. I just could tell from the very pilot episode of the show. Pilot episodes of shows are often absolute trash. The pilot of Dexter, I can almost hear it in my head, like when he says like tonight's the night, and like I can see those opening scenes of the show of him eating the Cuban sandwich in the car. They're just in my brain.
My name is Dexter Morgan. I don't know what made me the way I am, but whatever it was left a hollow place inside.
It was like falling hard and fast for a show. Dexter was amazing. But Dexter fell into the same trap that PLL did, but it was almost worse because I expected more from Dexter. PLL, you know, I can try and convince myself like, oh, this is a show for high schoolers. That's why they let it slip, and that's why they didn't give it an ending that it deserved. But Dexter should have done better. The first season of Dexter was gorgeous, beautiful, amazing. If you're not familiar with the show, each season kind of focuses on a particular killer. The first season is about the ice truck killer. The second season is about the Bay Harbor butcher. And I would maybe say that the second season is definitely equally as good, if not in some ways better than season 1. Season 3 took a little bit of a dip, but still great show. And season 4, I absolutely loved. The Trinity Killer storyline is one of my absolute favorites. I love it so much. But this is one of the biggest spoilers of the show. The Trinity Killer at the end of season 4 kills Dexter's partner Rita. And I know multiple people who quit watching the show after that. But in my opinion, that's almost a testament of how good the show was at making you care about the characters. Like, when I was watching it, I was on the edge of my seat. I couldn't believe that the show had the balls to kill off such an important character, and I like when shows do that. There are too many shows that, I'm gonna talk about another one in a minute, there are too many shows where a character should die off, but they make them survive anyway, and it feels artificial and fake. It was so good, and that just really brought it to the next level. I was like, wow, they're not afraid. So I continued watching. But it only took maybe 1 or 2 more seasons for Dexter to just, in my opinion, the final season, and really the final 2 seasons of Dexter, were like a completely different show. The characters were completely different. They were acting so out of character. Like, they built the relationship between Dexter and his sister Deb early on in the show. And their relationship, you know, it's normal for a relationship to change a little bit over time. But their relationship changes in the worst way possible. It's almost like it makes me want to gag. It completely took me out of the show and threw me off. I was like, I know this show can do better than this. Why are they doing this to me? And the ending of the show, oh God. You know what should have happened? Dexter should have died, but instead he goes off to live into the woods and start a new life in hiding. The end of that show just felt so jumbled together, like people didn't care anymore. It's okay to end a show after a couple of seasons. You don't have to make it go on forever. Stop while you're ahead, and then people will continue to rewatch the show for years to come. And the best show that is an example of fucking this up is Game of Thrones. And I am the 500th person to talk about how this show went to one of the greatest shows on television to maybe the worst thing HBO has ever dumped out. This show didn't really break me as much as it broke my boyfriend and many other people. But even though I didn't love the show as much as other people I know did, I recognize that it probably, even worse than Dexter and definitely worse than PLL, was one of the greatest crashing and burnings of a show I've ever had the mispleasure of witnessing, and witnessing someone who loved the show witness. The only reason I'm not super into Game of Thrones is just because I don't love the fantasy historical genre. I will admit that Game of Thrones had some great storylines and great writing. The production value is through the roof, clearly. Like, the show is extremely well made in that regard. And it was just very hard for me to keep up with the show. I find it very complex. That's not to say anything negative about the show. I almost think it was too good for me, and I'm used to watching, I watched Love Island. I watched PLL. Those shows are very low caliber. So watching Game of Thrones, it was very difficult for me to keep up with all the different complicated characters and storylines, but that also I know is one of the greatest parts of the show. Even I could see how badly these last 2 seasons were, but really the last season is what everyone talks about, and for a good reason. This show was a cultural phenomenon. The phrase "winter is coming" was everywhere. Everybody knew what it was from. This show hyped up the coming of winter and the coming of the Night King and the inevitable clash between the people, the regular people, and like the White Walkers. They hyped it up like it was the biggest battle the world had ever seen. Did anyone die in this battle? No. No one important, and people should have died. And also, it was over in the blink of an eye. They just completely didn't hold up to any of their own expectations. Like, I remember watching the final season, and I was like, okay, the battle's gonna start now, right? okay, it's gonna start now, right? Okay, they're all like crying and saying goodbye to each other and how we're not gonna make it out of this alive, and it felt like something really important was gonna happen. Characters who you've come to love and know are going to die because this is gonna be the biggest battle of all time. And instead, it was over in one single night, and the youngest and definitely not the best person to choose ends up defeating the biggest villain ever pretty goddamn easily, in my opinion. Like, I feel like it didn't even take very much for Arya to kill the Night King. It almost was like a metaphor of her like jumping into the air to kill him just out of nowhere. That almost kind of fit with the story. Like, all of a sudden she pops up out of nowhere into a storyline that she doesn't belong in at all and decides to kill the biggest villain of the show that they've hyped up so much. It was just so jarring. It came out of nowhere, just like she did. But even as someone who like had a hard time following the show, I could recognize like, hey, that doesn't match up with that other thing previously. Like, hey, this doesn't quite make sense. I was able to pick up on it. It almost made me more engrossed in the show, but in the worst way.
If the city surrenders, they will ring the bells and raise the gates. Please, if you hear them ringing the bells, call off the attack.
They're welcoming the new king.
I've never known bells to mean surrender.
I went from like not sure how I feel, like acknowledging it was a good show and well written, to hating it. It just broke people all across the world, I'm sure, who had to sit through that sad, sad ending of what was once the greatest show on TV in a lot of people's opinion, and just turn into something that it seemed that no one cared about. I hope this video was interesting to listen to me talk about shows that made me and shows that broke me. Hopefully it wasn't too long. If you enjoy this kind of thing, let me know in a comment or a like, and thanks for watching.